This week we are welcoming our second guest of the series to our new summer project started by the Ruskin Geography Department and Eco Committee. Each week across the summer, we're going to be talking to one guest across the environmental sector, finding out a little bit more about their stories, their journeys, and what we can really learn from their experiences. Following on from last week's talk with the Black Mambas, we are incredibly privileged to be joined by Ashley Leiman, the founder of the UK branch of the Orangutan Foundation. Many of our students hopefully will be familiar with the foundation and with Ashley. She visited us last year. Started 30 years ago, the foundation works in Borneo, protecting and combating the issues facing orangutans. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you. It's good to be back with you, even if it's by virtual technology rather than in the person. And thank you also to all the students for your continued support. It really does make a difference to us.
Oh, no, you're more than welcome. I know they've enjoyed getting involved. And in fact, they probably run a lot more of it than I do. So it's something they're really passionate about. So Ashley, could you just start us off sort of in your words? What is the work of the foundation? What are the main roles they have? What are the aims that you're working towards?
Well, the logo of the Orangutan Foundation is a future for orangutans, forests and people. We can't do what we do without actually having all the stakeholders involved. So orangutans live in the forest has to be saved, and people have to understand the benefit of the forest, and they are crucial stakeholders in this. So our work encompasses all that. In more detail, it encompasses habitat protection, research, education. We also rescue and translocate orangutans that are found in community lands and oil palm plantations. And the reason for this often, certainly in community lands, is because the communities and the villages are growing and the forest is shrinking. So there's far more opportunity for human-wildlife conflict. So those are the main areas that we look at. The orangutan is obviously a species. If you want to save the forest, you need enigmatic species for people to understand why. And importantly, the orangutan has a role in the forest as the gardener of the forest. Without orangutans in the forest, as they move through, they open up the canopy, they eat the fruits, they then defecate, and from that the seeds grow again. So if we didn't have orangutans and other fruit-eating animals in the forest, we actually wouldn't have a forest.
Brilliant, thank you. I think you've touched on 3 or 4 of my further questions as well. They're really comprehensive. So it's an orangutan foundation, but would you say your work is more about the species or more about the forest?
This year is our 30th anniversary, and we're celebrating 30 years of conservation. So we are a conservation organization. We don't only study orangutans. We're studying the tarsier, which is a nocturnal animal that lives in the forest. We also have studies on the freshwater crocodile that lives in the rivers. We have students studying birds, butterflies. So we really are a conservation organization, but it all started off with the forest.
So it's come from the forest, and then the orangutan's the vehicle through that really gets people on board.
And that's how it all started, really. It did start by me going into a rainforest back in, I think it was 1971 or 2. And in Malaysia, it was Taman Negara. I was living in Hong Kong at the time. And it's very hard to put into words and actually explain this, but I definitely had a very primal feeling as I walked through this forest, which is over 1 million years old, and you saw the size of the trees and just it's the lushness of it on one hand, but it's also the richness of it. It's a very, very special feeling. I mean, I have the same feeling in the UK about trees. I mean, I love trees, but when you see trees in such abundance, and there's something about a tropical forest. It's everything combined. It's the humidity, it's the growth of the trees, And I just walked through it knowing that these forests had to be saved.
It sounds like that had a real impact on your life.
It did, absolutely.
Did that affect the way you thought of the forest, the way you thought of sort of your position, the forest, how it relates to us?
Well, I felt it was primal. I really did. I felt, we come from here. This is saying, and actually the tree shrew, we are descendants from the tree shrew. So the tree shrew is actually, a forest dweller. So maybe I just had this absolute connection that we come from the forest, but I just felt at home there. This is where I belonged. It's a very difficult to put into words, but it was a very deep and primal feeling that this is where I belong, and I just knew that it had to. I feel wonderful when I'm in the forest. It just encompasses me. It sort of surrounds me, and I just know that, I just knew then that it had to be saved.
I think that's really interesting to hear. We do a lot of, across year 7, year 8, year 9, all the way up to sixth form, they study the rainforest, but actually to hear the impression of someone who's been there, I think probably puts a slightly different spin on it for them. So that you'd probably say is where it started for you. How did you then get from there to the point where you set up this, sorry, that's my cat, where you set up this foundation?
Well, it was a bit of a gap between that. I was very involved in Hong Kong with the Natural History Society, and I did study tropical rainforest ecology. And the ecology of the rainforest is absolutely fascinating. I mean, it is, it's just because it's very subtle in a rainforest, there are vines going up the trees, and that there are lianas, and it's rich. I mean, this is the thing about it. It's so rich. And it wasn't really until I went to New York, and there everybody was talking about the loss of the Amazon rainforest, and to a lesser degree the Congo Basin. But nobody knew that Indonesia had the 3rd largest area of rainforest in the world. Nobody knew it. It was just, first of all, half the people didn't even know where Indonesia was. But the fact that, there was so much in the press about the Amazon rainforest. And, Indonesia was sort of the unknown area. And I'd always had an interest in primates. So I was very fortunate when I was in New York to be able to go out to Kalimantan and study orangutans. And then when I came back to the UK, it was a case of, well, what do I do now? And I had actually lived here for 15 years. So I really did have to start from scratch, sort of introducing myself to various organizations, the Primate Society and that, and gradually just build up the foundation from an upstairs bedroom in my house at the time. So that's how it happened. And interesting, a lot of people sort of say, well, how did you do it without the internet or anything? I mean, it's sort of inconceivable today that you just did it with a telephone and a typewriter and you kept a book with all the names in. So it was a long journey, but yes, it was a very, I think when you've got saying you believe in that in such a way that somehow you've got to get this message across.
And how did you go about sort of setting up the on the ground operations in Kalimantan?
Well, we really became very active on the ground. The office here started 30 years ago, and I'd been going out there sort of continuously during that time. And it became obvious that, more needed to be done on the ground. And at that time, most of the work was focusing on the fact that lots of orangutans were coming into rehabilitation centers. The habitat was being cleared. Orangutans were then stranded. So most of the work and what people knew about was, rehabilitation. And there were a number of big rehabilitation centers throughout Kalimantan. And in fact, at one point, there were about 1,000 orangutans in rehabilitation centers. But we started off, we were very fortunate. We got a grant from the European Union, and we also had one from UNEP. And that allowed us to actually open an office And then we had to get ourselves registered in Indonesia as an international NGO. But we opened an office and slowly we grew. So we were able to start our work with habitat protection, with guard posts. We were able to start rescuing orangutans where needed. We were able to open in 2005 a research site. And we've always done education. We've always thought was that important. And then the last sort of thing we started was after the fires in 2015, so much of the habitat on one side of the Lamandau Reserve, which wasn't forest, was burned. So we started a reforestation program. So it was a gradual thing. It grew organically. As there was a need, we then filled that need. And today we've got 58 people, Indonesians, working for us.
So it sounds like it's been a real story of from the beginning. It's sort of slowly evolved in the directions it needed to.
And as I said, it's and also I look back on it, and there were some really tough times. I mean, 1998 to about 2003, there was rampant illegal logging inside national parks, and I would have to go and watch, rafts of logs coming down the river, and very little was done about it. I mean, that was probably the hardest time because we had no support then from the government. The illegal loggers were so powerful. It was eventually through a lot of outside and governments and the International Monetary Fund saying to Indonesia, you've got to sort of put a stop to this. So, but all along when I look back on it, I just keep saying to myself, what would it be like if we weren't there? And I know we've made a huge difference on the ground. We're a small organization. We're not like the big ones, but I think when you're small, you can be effective, and we've made a difference on the ground. There's no question. I mean, local people know so much more now. And, in the town where we have our office, we're well respected. And because we're Indonesian and we have all Indonesian people working for us, no non-Indonesians. So it's knowing you're making a difference.
I think so, and as I say, the impact that it has on our students being partnered and knowing the work of the foundation so well, that they get very passionate about it. I think the thing that interests me, I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about the environmental issues in a second, but how you've really taken it from sort of nothing to what it is now. What would you say was important for you achieving that? Was it contacts? Was it knowing the right people, or was it just sheer bloody mindedness and sticking at it?
Well, I sometimes look back on it and I do sort of wonder. No, it definitely, we were very, very lucky in one way, because we started off actually with the zoo community that had orangutans, and they obviously were very interested that there was an Orangutan Foundation, and they produced a small newsletter sort of announcing us. So I look back on our first early members, and a lot of them were zookeepers. Then there was a program made in the UK called Happy Families, and it was about an orangutan that was in Taiwan, and a number of orangutans were taken into Taiwan as pets. And it was a TV program with this orangutan called Dai Dai that sat with the family, ate with the family, was taught to use the lavatory, and it was this huge hit in Taiwan, Happy Family. But we knew it was wrong, and the Primate Society of the UK had an undercover investigating journalist, and they went out and made a program, and that ended up on television. And literally the night it went on air, I was the contact number at the BBC, and my phone started ringing, and I would have to say, yes, I know it's on, I'm trying to watch it, because we were saying, I can't believe it. And that really, the Radio Times covered it, the Primate Society covered it, and that gave us our first members. I think after that program, I probably, if I look at my ring-bound notebook that I kept all the names in, we probably got our first 70 or 80 members from that program. And then it's a bit like any business, really. And I think this is something that maybe people don't understand about a charity. You have a product, and it's your job to sell that product. In my case, it was the Orangutan Foundation, forests, orangutans. So I had to maintain that momentum from that program. So it was making contacts with other conservation organizations, having a membership, starting a newsletter was critical in our case. We had our 50th issue of the newsletter not so long ago, and we had a membership. A lot of organizations don't have memberships, and it was those members that were crucial because they gave you your constituency. So I think the way we did it, by having a membership, starting a newsletter, gradually that built and built and built. And then more programs were made about orangutans, and other organizations started. But you know, we were the first in the UK to bring orangutans to the attention of the public.
Oh, well, thank you for the insight. I think it is difficult sometimes. You see what it has become now, and it's difficult to see the path there. So I think hopefully that'll be quite insightful.
I can't say I had an agenda or I had an ambition or anything. It grew organically. It really did. I mean, you know, from 5 members to 50 members to 100 to the thousands, it grew. And, you know, now we're known. And if there's an issue about orangutans, the BBC will call here because they sort of know if we need to know who the expert is, they'll call this office.
And I suppose it must be quite rewarding for you to see the increase in awareness of these issues, you know, to the point where supermarkets are running adverts based on the issue.
Yeah, and also, you know, 30 years ago, I mean, well, no, I mean, literally, people didn't know what an orangutan was. I mean, it would be, oh, is it that orange monkey? And you'd say it comes from Indonesia, and it'd be, where's Indonesia? So when I gave talks, I had to put a map up to show where Indonesia was. It would have been easier if I'd have chosen gorillas or chimpanzees, because there was knowledge about them, Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey, but really nobody knew anything about orangutans.
Yeah, no, that's really changed, I think. And I suppose talking about those issues now, what do you feel? What do you feel now are the major issues sort of facing orangutans, facing the rainforest? What are the big things your organisation is up against?
I looked back at our newsletters, and I found newsletters going back 15 years, and we were talking about climate change then. Way before it ever really became a topic of conversation, really. So I thought it was quite interesting that we knew. Obviously, when we started, the big threat was logging. But at least with logging, you left trees standing. You know, that it wasn't clear felling. And the Landau Wildlife Reserve, which, you know, Ruskin Academy supports, it was a logging concession, but there was still enough trees there. And today, I mean, we've got over 600 orangutans there. And this month alone, we've had 4 births. So it shows that although it was a logging concession, the habitat was good enough to sustain this orangutan population and for them to go on and breed. So logging used to be the bad boy. Now, compared to something like oil palm, which did have clear felling and then was converted to agriculture, was far more worrying. It wouldn't have been worrying if they had used degraded land. And that was always the position we had. It wasn't that we were against it. It was just they were cutting down primary forest. And by losing primary forest, you were losing, you know, all the species within it. And that then also contributed to the whole debate on climate change. So we talk now in the foundation a lot about maintaining standing forests to mitigate climate change. And I have got one little story where, well, in the beginning, when people didn't understand climate change, near to where we work, there's some gold mines. And I used to take people out there, and we'd stand in this, you know, the gold mine area, which looked like a complete moonscape. You know, it was alluvial soil, there was gold underneath it. They were digging these huge pits. And we'd stand there under this blazing sun. And yet, if you look down the river a few kilometers where forest was still, you would see the buildup of cloud.
Yes, yeah.
And you'd show that to people and they'd say, oh, gosh, yes, you know, we need trees. And with trees, you're going to have mush, you're going to have rain. It was like a little light went on in their head, that they suddenly understood why trees are important in terms of the climate. And today in Indonesia, because They've had terrible floods in Jakarta. We've had flooding in Pangkalambun. People are all saying it's about climate change. Everybody now understands climate change, but it took a long time for them to recognize that all the landslides and the flooding and everything is about climate change.
So would you say you are seeing the impacts of climate change happening now in Borneo?
Absolutely. I mean, we're in the end of July, and it should be now the dry season. I mean, the rainy season is sort of October, November to March, April. I've just had photographs from the field where 3 of our guard posts, I mean, the staff was standing up to their waist in water, and they're situated on rivers. So there's been so much water, the rivers, the level of the river has risen, and they're completely flooded. And even in town, they sent me a little video of a road we go along all the time that's flooded. Now, July, to have that amount of rain? No, it's just not heard of. And people now are really, so the biggest change has been the shift to understanding that forests are responsible, or lack of forest is responsible for climate change.
I think that's a really interesting point. Going back to you mentioning the flooding, a lot of our students associate climate change with the term global warming. So for them, they'd imagine seeing climate change means it's very dry, it's very hot. But for Borneo, that it's not so much that. How would you describe what sort of the change in climate patterns?
Well, that's why I call it climate change.
Yeah.
I think global warming is showing that the rise of temperature worldwide is rising, and that's global warming.
Yeah.
But that isn't affecting the actual weather pattern. The weather pattern is caused by climate change. I mean, this year in India, they've had they've always had, monsoons and that, but never to the degree that they're having them at the moment. The fact that the poles are melting, I mean, that you can argue that is global warming,
Yeah.
But we don't use that. We definitely just use the climate is changing, and in some areas there's no seasons anymore. So the rainy season might go for 9 months, and then the dry season might be when the rainy season would be. And we've seen it in the UK. We've had, the climate's changed here dramatically in our lifetimes. You look at Christmas cards where people were skating on lakes and ponds. I mean, when was the last time we had, Victorian type skating on lakes and that? It just doesn't happen anymore. So it's climate change. I think if students can understand, it's the pattern of weather that's changing. And it is down to, again, another fact that people didn't realize is that the greenhouse emissions, that the 2 top countries were China and America, but third was Indonesia. And that was because of the loss of forest.
Yeah, from some of I think the pre-release that our GCSE students had to focus on last year was looking at deforestation. There were statistics in there about net cover change and how huge it was for Indonesia as a negative loss of forest compared with even Brazil and other places.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and that's why it was sort of critical. So that is where, in a sense, our work has changed, because now we sort of focus on, ways that we can mitigate climate change, and we use that now in a lot of social media, and that we talk about mitigating climate change. Because cutting down, but they're not cutting down trees anyway. If we cut them down here, I mean, it's going to be releasing carbon dioxide. So, but it's the scale of it. Yeah. Exactly.
It's astounding, isn't it?
It's the scale of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that'll be really, really valuable for our students, because certainly in my lessons, I try and prompt them to use the term global weirding rather than global warming, which I think I read in an article somewhere. And I think hearing from you how interconnected it is, how the deforestation is leading to the climate change, which is then causing that runaway negative effects. How would you say that changing climate pattern is having a direct effect on the orangutans?
It is, because orangutans need, for females to become reproductive, orangutans need lots of soft pulpy fruits, and that. The forest has evolved historically around the rainy season and the dry season. Now, we do phenology studies where we go into our transects and we look at how many trees are flowering, how many have new leaves, how many have new fruit, how many, and so we can see, and from that we can see how there'll be times where there should be fruit in the forest and there isn't fruit in the forest because of the change in the weather. And that's going to affect orangutans, because it could be that there won't be any fruit and they'll resort to bark or resort to just leaves. I mean, some leaves are obviously, there's a lot of tradition. So it's absolutely, and it's not something we're seeing now, it's a trend. So if you have a young orangutan who's 12 or 13 that's going to start becoming reproductive and the weather continues the way it does, it may totally change her reproduction pattern, because the fruit supply that she needs is not going to be there at the times that she needs them because of the change in the weather pattern.
That's it. I suppose the question I'd then have from that, obviously, orangutans have one of the longest childhoods in the animal kingdom and they learn an awful lot. Is that having a knock-on effect in their behaviour patterns longer term?
I can't say we've seen that. I mean, I'm usually out there 3 or 4 times. No, that's why I think it's a trend we have to look at. We may not be seeing it now, but I mean, I don't know in 10, 15 years how that may affect. Will the infant grow at the same rate that it should be growing? Will it need continuous more supply from the mother? So I think it's a trend that we don't know, but I would argue it's very important to be aware of that. It's not today that we're looking at. It's looking at the next 10, 15, 20 years and how this is going to change potentially orangutan behavior. And they may change their diets. They may go for more vine and lianas and things like that and have to change it and less fruit. We don't know.
So it sounds like the big threat is that change in the unpredictability, the changes, the lack of how it's always been sort of changing for them.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, the government has now a moratorium on giving out any more licenses for oil palm plantations, which is a very, very good move.
Yeah,
no, it is. I think, they realize, and also there's been a big donation from the Norwegians to Indonesia. And the caveat is that they've got to start showing, that they're no longer destroying the forest, and that. So it's a big carrot and stick exercise. So it is making a difference, and I think in that way we will see. But and then I think what might happen, it may not be the big companies that are doing it. It might be small holdings, because you get 2 hectares to be able to grow on it what you want. So, and I don't think oil palm is going to go away. I mean, it's such a valuable crop. I mean, it's going to be around forever. So it's tricky, because, as I said, logging was the bad guy, and now we look back and think, well, logging wasn't that bad compared to oil palm. And it's not only oil palm. One of the other people don't realize, now in Indonesia, you've got huge acacia plantations, and the acacia is used for making paper pulp.
Oh, so that's only going to grow.
Well, exactly, and the biggest buyer is China. So, and again, here you ask what we can do here. I mean, it is if you're going to be buying reams and reams of paper, you should try and find paper that is from a sustainable source. You don't want to be contributing to paper from Indonesia, where they've cut down forests to plant acacia trees. So yeah, paper is another issue. We talk about oil palm, but actually paper. And I think the biggest threat looking ahead is going to be mining.
Yeah, we teach about that, and it's the pictures of what's left after mining is just heart-wrenching.
It's I think Kalimantan is probably sitting on huge mineral deposits. It's very hard to extract, which is why to date it hasn't really happened. It's too expensive. But we know in East Kalimantan they've got huge coal mines, and actually they've even gone inside the national park. Again, they're exported to China. So the coal goes to China. There's iron ore that we know of, and there's gold, but the gold will never become an export, but locally, I mean, it's manufactured locally and then sold locally, but for a local economy, that it can bring in quite a lot. So I think long term, looking ahead, mining could be a big issue for Kalimantan.
The last thing it needs is another issue.
Yes.
What's the good news then? What's going in the right direction? What's the progress that's been made, if there is any? What's going well?
I think recognizing climate change. It really is. Even if I've been in Jakarta and I get into an elevator and it's pouring with rain or something, they'll say, "Oh yeah, climate change." I think that's been the biggest change in the mentality of people, to not see for themselves the effect of climate change and how it's affecting their lives with, as I said, all this flooding and everything else. So that is, and I think the good news is the younger generation is a lot more active. 10 years ago, they didn't have Primate Day. They didn't have days where it was car free. The schools are much more aware of it. So I think the younger generation, definitely, they're going to be more active. They're going to expect more from the government.
That's good.
So I think it'll be the younger generation that's going to make a difference. We've got a really active group where we work in Pangkalambun, and they're quite militant. They're very, very active, and they're holding demonstrations and that. So I think we've got to have faith in the younger generation.
I think that's really encouraging to hear that it is the younger ones who are leading it. Are you seeing that awareness translating into action on a sort of meaningful level?
It's very difficult. They're a very non-confrontational society. So usually if there are big demonstrations, they're often political. Mm-hmm. But if you've got a town where we are, a few 100,000 people, and there are they're walking around saying, stop cutting down the forests, protect primates, and that means that all the local inhabitants are seeing it as well. So again, I think it's something that is growing, but Indonesia is terribly sensitive to this sort of thing. The Mongabay?
I've heard of it.
Yeah. Well, there was a reporter from Mongabay that was in Palangkaraya, which is the capital of central Kalimantan, and he was arrested and held for a number of weeks. He went to a sort of a group meeting with activists, and he was held for a number of weeks. So it's a tricky place to work in that way. We don't campaign, and we take, in a sense, a low profile when it comes to things like campaigning. We can help the local organizations, and we hold meetings in our office we have Conservation Corner. And this is a new thing. We've had 4 or 5 meetings in the office in our Conservation Corner. That wouldn't have happened 5 years ago at all. So that's the big change. But you have to be aware of how sensitive Indonesia is to criticism.
Yeah. It's nice to hear the progress, and it sounds like that progress is quite rapid, almost because of how real the threat has become there.
And I think if we weren't there, and our office wasn't there to have a Conservation Corner and to encourage these people, and that these things wouldn't have happened. So it's very positive to see the difference we've made. And for me, going out there, it motivates me, because sitting here in an office is, you're so far removed from it all that but I don't think I could have done it for 30 years without feeling that we've made a huge difference. And we're recognized for that difference. And we've also got the support of, the conservation organizations like the Primate Society here, because we are scientific as well. We don't just do stories for the sake of stories. We try and be as factual as possible with what we're doing. you know, we don't have problems like the African apes with poaching and bushmeat and that. There's only one threat for orangutans, and that's habitat loss.
But it sounds like it's moving in the right direction, at least locally.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And I think in other areas of Kalimantan, there's a good organization in West Kalimantan. They do outreach. It's education and outreach, and that's why we say future for people. They are going to make the difference in the future.
That's brilliant to hear. I think you've made it really obvious for Borneo, but why should our students care about what's happening to the rainforest and to the orangutans?
I think we're all linked. You know, my view is we're caretakers of this planet. It's not ours to do with what we want. We are just caretakers. So I think we're all linked. If they can have that same sense of responsibility locally, in the area that they live in, it may not be necessarily about orangutans, but I sort of see it as a bigger picture of sort of just taking care of this planet. I mean, you know, and I think at a local level, there's so much sort of nature around that, you know, you can sort of see for yourself and think, well, what would happen if it was gone? How would you feel if that was gone? And so I think if I say to people, you know, think about if you didn't see bluebells in spring or you didn't see a robin or anything, how would you feel if you lost your nature? And they go, oh no, it'd be awful. The world would be a concrete jungle without trees. And I say, well, that's what we're doing. I mean, we're doing it in Indonesia to save nature. But I think if everybody looks at it that way, that you've got your own nature to save. And also, you know, if you are worried about where you know, if you have the opportunity to be careful of what you buy, I mean, obviously, if you can buy sustainable palm oil and, you know, like schools and that, you know, look at where you source your paper from. Try not to, you know, I mean, I've seen paper from Indonesia in Raimans. I know that it is exported to here. That's one step that people can make. But I think if people can bring it to a local level as well. Obviously, the support you give to the foundation, it's your money that helps us do what we're doing out there. You know, we can't do it without that. So yes, so the fact you fundraise and give us money is wonderful because we can't do it without you. But on the local level, I think if people sort of think of it globally, we're doing what we do, and if people do it locally as well, we're all connected in that way.
Well, if that isn't an advert for our eco club, I don't know what is. They're very active in that way. So
yeah, no, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I think we sort of, you know, make them. It's so important to be doing that. Yeah, I mean, definitely.
So any local climate change mitigation, raising awareness of buying patterns, all that kind of thing is what we need to be doing here, is it?
Yeah, I think so. I think because if we're in that way, we're all contributing to the big picture. So I don't think we can sort of isolate ourselves from either just what I'm doing in Indonesia or you're just doing in the area of Lincolnshire or whatever. I think, you know, you start small. It's like a, you know, acorn of an oak tree. You start with that, and then it expands. And so I think with your students, I don't know long term, but even if a percentage of them, because of what you're doing with your eco club or what they've heard we're doing or what people are doing overseas, switches on that light, you know, and they're sparking their brain and think, yeah, well, hold on, maybe there are things we can do. Career-wise, I think geography at the moment is probably the most important subject.
I promise I've not paid you to say that.
No, I truly believe it. I really do. I mean, I've got my geographical here. You'll get some more. They've been posted. I've got more. You look, and it's not just human geography. Geography is affecting everything that we do. You know, it goes back to your mining. It goes back to how, I mean, this one is about rethinking Britain's national park. So that's being local. And so for me, geography is, it's everything. It's the whole environment comes back to geography. It wasn't when I was at school, which was, you know, how many capitals can you name? No, my granddaughter's doing geography at Edinburgh. And I think it's a really, really important subject. But there's so many strands to it. You can never be bored with geography.
Well, it's nice to hear somebody so involved saying something like that. I always start off in year 7 with my students. They have to try and name something that's not connected to geography, and I have to try and convince them it is. And I've not been beaten yet. So I think you've highlighted the point really well there.
Well, because I said, so many strands. You could never be bored.
Absolutely. Last point I want to touch on with the environmental issues, I suppose, is what impact the pandemic you think might have on that. Certainly some of the reports I've read suggesting that the degradation of rainforests is leading to a higher chance of pandemics. Do you think that will change the way we view the rainforests?
I see that every day. I have a listserv, so it covers everything. And yes, I mean, there's more now coming out about if we're really going to stop this, we should stop looking at destroying rainforests. If you consider that by destroying rainforests, the very animals that might be coming out that maybe spread the virus, then where do they come from in the first place? So again, it goes back to the habitat. So it's finding ways to maintain the habitat as well. I would hope that message does get through. I think it's difficult to relate to. It's something very abstract for people to actually relate to that. But I don't think here enough people actually are relating to the cause of it at all. I find that is a bit frustrating, but it's interesting you've picked up on the rainforest, because I wasn't sure how wide that link was being made. I mean, as I said, I read it, but I wasn't quite sure. No, it's just, we can't abuse this planet we've got. You've got to take care of it. And by doing that, we are going to get a little bit of a kick in the bottom. Be it, I do believe that. I think that, in the end, I think, nature's going to get its own back sometimes. We do have to respect that.
I think what it does do is it really lays bare our connections to the natural world.
Yeah.
And I think there's a tendency to see ourselves as separate to that. And hopefully this might ground us back in that context a bit more.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I hope we make that connection, because we can't keep on the way we are, because these if we do, this won't be the last one.
Yes,
there are moves. I mean, Vietnam now has stopped illegal trade only this week. I mean, yeah. So I think countries in Southeast Asia, and they've probably handled it better because they had SARS, so they already had the experience of having that. But yeah, no, I think we're not directly involved in that way, but I think it's made those countries more aware of it. But from our end, I think, scientifically, people don't like to use the word nature. They say biodiversity and all those things. It's just going back to saving nature.
And how important that is for us.
That's what it really is. We shouldn't be afraid of saying it's nature. I mean, so I just think we've got to recognize that.
Yeah, I think that's a vital point.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I think that's covered, way more than I hoped to. The last bit I'd sort of like to talk about then is our students who see a career in the future, possibly in this sector. What sort of career? Obviously, you've got a whole organisation, and it's not just the people on the ground that are vital for that. What are the sort of careers that you see being involved in this sector?
It's very hard because, again, more used to be that there were lots of field opportunities going back. Now, most places, local people are doing a lot of the things that before, particularly in Africa as well, all the organizations were headed by, a non-local person. So now it's becoming much more, and which is the way it should be, in our case. I think it's somehow looking at where gaps are. I mean, we're a small organization. So here, for example, social media has become very, very important. That is a way of raising awareness. I think having good writing skills is important. Looking where gaps are. If you look at, say, what people are doing, or job opportunities, like, well, why isn't anybody doing this? You know, it's trying to find out where the gaps are. It can be very dry. Parts of geography are quite dry. People that are good at maths can look at it from going to looking at statistics and that sort of thing. Field work and going directly into conservation is quite hard, and I say that to zoology and biology students. It's very hard now to do a primate degree. The chance of getting a job, unless they go into academia, is going to be very, very hard. And actually, conservation isn't always a feel-good thing. When you look at what's happening to the number of species that are, and I think, again, maybe at a local level, doing more locally, getting involved with, wildlife organizations locally. If they do that and they then want to move on, you've got a basis. You need to show that where your interests are, and often if you're doing something, even as a volunteer locally. I know when I came to the school, you were saying that a lot of the students just follow on from what their fathers did and everything. I mean, I'll ask you, are you seeing a change in what they want from their future?
I think for what we certainly see is a change in awareness of the issues and a want to help fix it. I think what a lot of our students maybe don't see is the how to do that and the path to get into that. So I think a lot of them feel they need to know what they want to do now. And I think it's important for them to see, actually, if you work on the qualities and the skills, because what you've touched on, there are a lot of skills and qualities that aren't necessarily an academic route going into universities. There's other ways into it. And I think that is sort of a takeaway message I'd like to try and get home.
Yeah, no, I mean, if they do things locally and you've got somebody who's really, really good at writing, I mean, often a lot of local organizations don't have somebody that could write them a newsletter or write them, a circular that's going to go around to people, that sort of thing. I mean, I think it's hard. I think it's very hard for young people today. I mean, and particularly with what's happened, it's going to be even more difficult. I think they've got to be flexible. They've got to be really flexible.
Keeping as many doors open now as possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just because you're doing geography doesn't mean it's going to end up with geography. I think they've got to be very, very flexible. I think
the highest uptake for geography graduates is actually into banking and the finance sector. So it is, as you say, a wide-ranging.
Well, yeah, I know people that did the history of art and end up working for the banks. I mean, no, they weren't that. The city was not that. Wasn't the degree necessarily they were looking for, but they just wanted good recruits. So in that way, I think. But that's why I think geography is a good one now, because finance is global.
Yeah.
So if you look at what's happening economically, and I mean. I don't know anybody doing geography that doesn't have to do some sort of economics with it. If you're looking at how we use land, is it economically viable? Is it going? All these things. It's the use of it. So in that respect, I don't know why it's coming to me more and more. It wasn't. Can't say I felt like this before. I do think starting off doing something locally. And then once they've done that and it looks good on their CV, I think it will probably help them if they wanted to do something more. I'm becoming more.
So I think the interesting thing I'm getting from that is the individual drive, the commitment to something, working on your personal skills and keeping your options open rather than necessarily picking one direct path and
I think that's why I asked you, because you said before that a lot of them just go into what their father did, and if you're seeing a change in that. I mean, I don't know how the fact that you've got an interesting the eco group and the fact you invited me and that you obviously have got a lot of interest in your students and that, and they probably don't realize just how important it is to be active locally.
I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of our students feel as if they care about it but can't do anything about it. So it's really good to hear that that local work does make a difference.
No, I think so. I think that's, because it shows they've got an interest. And if they did want to expand that to do something sort of more, within the whole of the UK or even globally, I think it shows a very sort of a commitment, and a commitment and an interest.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting takeaway point. I suppose you've touched on it already, really, but the last question I wanted to ask was if you had to give one piece of advice to someone in their teenage years now looking at the future ahead of them, what do you think it would be really vital for them to know? Always a tough one.
I think curiosity goes a long way. I mean, it's not that you're vital to know. I think if somebody's got a curious mind, it'll open up just about anything, because they'll be curious about everything. And that would just say, oh God, how did that happen? And, why is the whys and the wheres and everything. Advice.
I mean, I think that point covers it nicely. I think that summarizes what we've spoken about.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you're determined and committed, you will get where you want to go, and don't give up. But I think it's very difficult in this climate. But I would say get behind you, try and go to university if they can. Well, it's a difficult one as well at the moment, because they're saying don't go to university. It's really, really hard at the moment.
I think that there's no one path. If you've got
there's no right path, but I think get good skills. That's what I would say. Just get good skills. I mean, what I don't see is a lot of good writing. I don't see it a lot. But I mean, and whatever your skill is, focus on that and use it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
But be a curious person.
Very last point then. What can people at home do to support the Orangutan Foundation? What is the support you look for?
Well, talking about our work, obviously, and that, I mean, I've got an intern here at the moment who comes from a background where he wants to be an accountant, but we were left, and he's coming as an intern, and orangutans were as far removed from his background as anything. I said, are your friends laughing at you? And he goes, no, I tell them I'm saving orangutans. So, you know what I mean? So he's doing that and telling them, if they sort of say, yeah, well, we're working with the Orangutan Foundation because the Orangutan Foundation is doing what they can to keep the forest, and by keeping the forest, they're helping stop climate change. So even if they're just talking to their friends and saying, well, what's important about supporting the Orangutan Foundation? They'll say, oh, well, they're stopping climate change or something like that. You know what I mean? So yeah. Outreach with them. And obviously your fundraising's been amazing and that. I know I haven't sent you some of the videos that I said, but the last few months have been, since I was with you last year, and, we've had our issues in the field as well, but I will follow up on that. But yeah, no, I think I'm impressed with your school, I have to say. I think we have a lot of schools that raise, 2, 3, 4 small things or brownie groups, but I've never come across a school that, and I thank you for that, and that has been quite as on the ball as you have been.
Oh, well, that's lovely to hear, and thank you for that.
I haven't met a school, and I mean, I will do as much as I can to help you your end as well. I really will. And if you tell me what you want, I mean, I've got another batch of these to send to you. They were posted to the other ones last week. So, yeah, no, I hope that out of all this, that even if it's a small percentage of all your students go on and say, yeah, that made a difference, and that inspired me, so I want to go and do more.
I think a lot of our students are inspired by your work. Thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure, and I'm around and help you as much as I possibly can. Is there anything more you'd like from us?
I think for the moment, your time and your effort has been more than we could ask for. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, my pleasure. Do stay in touch, Nathan.
Will do.
Bye.